Hi everyone, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how to paint German Shepherd ears in acrylics. Now the tips and techniques that I share in this video can be applied to any animal ear with an upright position. Now the very first thing that I like to focus on is getting a fairly accurate base layer in place. Now as you can see here, I'm using a combination of filbert and round brushes just to map in my main lights and darks. Now I'm really not focusing at all on the exact colour. I can adjust all of that as I build up my layers through the use of glazes. But what I want to be really focusing on is trying to simplify that reference photo as much as I can. So this first layer is purely to break up with the main lights and darks to make it easier, less daunting to tackle. Now what's really important at this stage is to notice the skin part of the ear. So normally when you've got the upright ears, you are going to see the pink or reddish colour at the back of the ear. You might in some cases have a bit of a browner tint. It's really going to depend on the light source. But there you want to be making sure that you've got the skin portion of this accurate. So I'm really focusing on using blending and softening techniques to make sure that I don't have any harsh start and stop points. Now of course, depending on the lighting, how the ear is positioned, the placement, whether or not it's got more of that fur overlapping the centre of the ear, all of this is going to vary how much of the skin is visible and how light or dark it should be. So it's really important to study that reference photo closely. Now once I was happy with that stage, this is where I can start to tidy up everything else and also adjust the colour. So you can see there that I put a little bit more of a redder colour over the top, and that was all through the use of a glaze. Now I do have a video here on YouTube where I'm talking about glazes. I've got various examples of different paintings where I'm using glazes for different effects. If that's of interest, then I'll link that video in the description below. Now one of the key aspects that I do like to focus on, even at this initial stage, is how I'm using the brush to replicate the right fur direction. Now I've also got a video here on YouTube and it's my top tips for painting realistic fur in acrylics. I'll also link that in the description below if it's of interest. But in that video I talk about a few things, one of which is fur direction. Now even with the ear, the way that the fur curves on the edges and the lower part of the ear is really important. This is also going to help establish the shape of that ear. And of course the shape of the ear is going to be very unique to each individual animal. Even though a German Shepherd, they typically tend to have upright ears, each dog is going to have a slightly different shape. So it's really important that we again do study that reference photo closely. Now the right ear that I'm currently working on, this requires a different technique because this ear was a little out of focus. So as you can see, I'm starting to use more of my softening and blending techniques to make sure that I've captured that out of focus effect. Now because the acrylics dry faster, blending can be a little bit more challenging, but it is possible if the right techniques are used. This is something that I do focus all of my real-time step-by-step lessons on, and everything is covered very thoroughly. Because I've got a voiceover while I'm painting, everything is explained in the moment. So the way that I use my brushes, how I'm holding my brush, the layering process, the glazes, every single decision I make is explained in the moment. So it makes even the most complex subjects easier to tackle. So if this or any of my other step-by-step lessons are of interest, then I will link all of that in the description below. Now at this stage, this is where I'm starting to hint at a little bit more of that fur texture. So I want to be focusing on that brush technique yet again. So the fur direction is something that I'm always looking to reinforce, but here I'm also focusing on the fur length and the fur thickness. Now as we start to work towards the middle and top part of the ear where it does become more pointy, we want to be making sure that we are shortening our brush strokes. If we make our brush strokes the same length at the base of the ear, then the fur is going to look far longer, more fluffier than it should do. So if there is any alteration in the length of that fur, we do want to be making sure to adjust the brush strokes as well. Now again on this side you can see how I'm blending out my sets of brush strokes. This is really important if I'm going to create that out of focus effect and make this ear look like it's further away. That's going to really help with the overall depth of this piece and make the detail on the face appear more in focus. So this really does help with that three-dimensional look of a portrait that we're trying to capture. Now the other aspect that I'm paying real close attention to is the fur on the very edge of the ear. So you can see that I've got a few of those brush strokes that are overlapping the background. Now this is something that I do feel is really important because those finer details help to make the subject look in front of the background. If all of the edges are solid, it does give the impression that that animal is more of a sticker that's been stuck onto that canvas. So even if there are a few hairs that are overlapping in a few tiny little areas, I'm always wanting to make sure that I can capture some of those, just to bring again that subject forward and separate it from that background. Now as I continue to layer here with my liner brush, you can really see how the layering process is a gradual process. It's not about just working with a base layer and then jumping into the brightest highlights. I'm working with many of my midtones first and saving my lighter details for later. No matter what fur it is that I'm painting, this is always the same layering process that I will use, making sure that I am building that up in stages. Now of course how I approach that layering process might be different for a lighter coated animal, but in terms of the number of layers I'm using, it's still making sure that I'm adding enough. For this level of realism, I don't just want to be working with 2 or 3 layers. In some cases I might maybe have up to 15 layers. It's all going to be very unique to that one painting that I'm creating, but as long as I know that I've captured a range of the shadows, midtone and highlights, I know that I've got enough of those layers in place. Now if I know that I'm going to be using a glaze to adjust the colour of that fur, then it might be that I make my highlights look a little brighter for this in-between midtone layer. Now if you are using a glaze, it is really important to make sure that your layers underneath can cope with that glaze, because obviously it is going to darken it to some degree. Now this is something that I do mention in that glazing video, which I have popped a link to in the description below. But making sure that we are focusing on the values is what I like to focus on more so than the exact colour. We can adjust the colour if we need to right at the very end. Now in some cases you could work with just a grayscale painting and add your colours in a separate process. You don't have to work with glazes throughout your layering process as I have here. However, I really do like to make sure that once I've got the right amount of texture in, and I'm sort of at that point now, once I've got these few little details in, I can start to consider adjusting that colour. But it's not something that I feel like I have to do at every layer. If I work with one layer of paint and I feel like I need to adjust the colour, but my values are still lacking, I'm going to prioritise my value, so my lights or my darks, more so than worrying about a glaze to adjust the colour. Now this really does simplify the process, and it means that I don't have to worry about mixing the exact colour and the lightness or darkness of that colour all at the same process. I can split it up into 2 stages. Now as I start to work more with my finer but longer details, again you can see how it's important to have worked with the fur that is closest to the skin and build up from there. This is going to make a massive difference to how realistic the painting looks. Now these tiny hairs directly on top of the skin, the centre back part of the ear, these look a little bit random to start with. This is just because it's that first layer. As I continue to add more of those brush strokes, you can see that I'm making it look like that fur is gradually overlapping onto the skin and then becoming a little bit more of that thicker fur on the very edge of the ear. So this is all about that layering process and making sure that we paint the right layer at the right time. And again, because I'm happy now with the base of the ear, I can start to overlap these details on the side of the face. This helps to make it look like the ear is set just a little bit further back and making sure that we've got each section of that face at the right level. So if we didn't have those details overlapping the ear, it's going to give the impression that the ear and the side of the face are attached at the same point on the skull. Whereas we want to give the impression that the eye is further forward and then it's sloping away towards the back of the ear, where it does attach towards that rear part of the skull. So this is all something that I'm looking to capture, and it might just be about adding a few details over the top of an area that were previously lacking. Just by adding those details, we're giving more of that shape and form to the painting. So I really do hope that this video has been useful. If it was, I'd be very grateful if you could give it a like and a thumbs up, because it makes a huge difference to my channel. I also upload a couple of videos to YouTube every week, so if you would like to get notified of that content, then don't forget to hit the subscribe and the bell button. If you are interested in painting along to this lesson, then as I mentioned, all of that is linked in the description below. If you've got any art related questions, feel free to pop them in the comments, because I'm more than happy to help if I can. And I'm going to be uploading another video at the end of the week, but as always, thank you so much for watching.